Hello again. Good morning. Steve here with a few comments on a topic I'm going to call questioning conclusions. Now, we hear about these sort of sayings, don't we? Lots of times. These timeless statements, question your conclusions. But sometimes it's good to have a look at that and how it applies to our own lives, I guess. Now, I'm going to use the example of how sometimes, I'm sure you've been asked before too, if you're at a social event or whatever, somebody will they'll start talking to you and say, "Oh, what do you do?" In the B group, "What do you do? What do you do?" and so on, right? And this happened to me about a week ago. I was at a social event, and there was half a dozen people standing around, and there was the gregarious guy in the crowd, right? So he tells us about what he does and how he lived in Japan for a number of years, etc., etc. And then he goes around and he asks everybody, "What do you do? And what do you do?" And I work in the law business, and I work in engineering and whatever, right? And it comes past me, and I just, I do building maintenance. Like a self-employed building maintenance guy. Didn't think much of it. And then this morning when I was out for a run, this idea of questioning conclusions came to me, and it leads into this, right? Because so often we come to conclusions in many areas, and if we don't question why are we actually concluding that, then maybe we can't glean any more information from it. You see, because we obviously individually we identify, as an example, with our name and our family and what we do for what we work at and this sort of thing, right? So there's Steve, the building maintenance guy. Or the handyman, whatever it is. I associate with that sometimes. Or, my name is Steve and I work for XYZ Corporation or whatever. It's sort of like I fit in now because so everybody else, the other guy worked for ABC Corporation or whatever. And it's rather boring, but it's in the Overton window of what people talk about in these sort of situations, right? But like we talked about before, in terms of, if we were to question our conclusion in that, and we're working towards some kind of brand for ourselves, or we want to be just at the edge of what is the normal discussion, or we want to be more curious in terms of more honesty in what it is we actually do. We could say something along the lines of, "I'm working towards my ideal." We might not say that. We word it in such a way that that's not actually said, and I'll use an example. But if we want to work for something grander in life, then what we're actually doing during the day is not really what we're doing any more than we're breathing or we're eating lunch or something like that. I mean, if somebody was to ask me, "Steve, what do you do?" And I was to ask a question, for greater clarity, I'm not sure what you mean by the question. Like, what am I doing here? What am I doing tomorrow? Etc. What am I doing at this social event? No. What do you do for a living? Okay, well that's greater clarity then. I could honestly say, just as much as I could say I do building maintenance, I could just as easily say I eat. Because that's also partly true. Part of the reason why I'm living is because I eat. But I know what they're looking for. Well, I think I know what they're looking for. Anyways, that would be a conclusion if I knew. But I think I do because of what socially is common. But for greater clarity, right? The eating, the sleeping, the building maintenance, the talking to people, the driving here and there, and so on. If there's an ideal and everything's funneled towards the ideal, like we talked about before, then really what I'm doing is working for that ideal, for the fulfillment, or for the continuous path, the continual realization of that ideal. That's what I'm really doing, right? And I could, if my ideal would be, and partly it is to help people become more confident through public speaking. or become more confident public speakers, or improve the quality of their life experience in a more general sense. If I was to say that in a circle, a social circle, which I thought about that afterwards, why didn't I say that? It's because I customarily think of in terms of more of a box, right? This is a very common human trait, is to think of what is my immediate, need? What am I doing like tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock in the morning? I'm getting up and going to a handyman or a building maintenance job, right? But what all that does, what the handyman job does, what the eating job does, what the driving does, is it's all giving energy and resources to the ideal, to the fulfillment and the continual realization of the ideal. That's what it's really doing. So in fact, what I'm doing is I'm working towards that. Everything else is steps. It's just like if you go to build a house, part of the step is you might have to actually go down and have a meeting with the bank to get a mortgage or so on, whatever. If somebody used to ask you, what are you doing over the next few months? Or what are you doing tomorrow? You might say, I'm working on my house. But part of the deal is you're actually going down and getting this bank loan. It's not necessarily that you want to do the bank loan, but it's a necessary step that you see. At least that's what you see as a possible step. And the handyman stuff's because I've been doing it for so long, I'm keeping on doing it because it's what pays the daily bread sort of thing, to work towards the ideal. But what I'm really doing, the purpose for it, is to work towards the ideal, a great degree of it anyways. So, there's another good benefit to this too. It's getting clear in ourselves for sure, right? This questioning our conclusions. It helps us get more clear in what it is that we're doing, but it also helps us to refine our message in terms of delivering it, because the inevitability when we say something. See, if I just stand up and I say, well, I work for XYZ Corporation, or I do building maintenance and so on. There's not usually a lot of curiosity because people have heard those things over and over again, right? But if I stand up and I say, actually, I help people become more confident through public speaking. Like, wow, that's pretty amazing. Nobody's ever heard that before. So we have to be prepared, I have to be prepared in a case like that for the inevitable questions that will follow after the event and so on. Somebody's going to come up and say, ask questions like, how do you do that? How does that actually work? And so on. And I have to have then the elevator speech, the pitch, and I have to have the contact information sheet to give to them to make sure, or put it into my phone or whatever, because I want to follow up on them later. This is part of self-marketing in a way, right? And this leads me to the point of part of the point of this video is for us to always question our conclusions, because even if I was to get to that, even if I was to say that I am somebody who I work as somebody who helps people to become more confident through public speaking, that is also a conclusion, right? So I must continue to define that, and by defining it, I'm continually questioning the conclusion. Like, what is it that I do? What is it that I do? And it's like when you're driving a great distance, over every hill, you get to see the more details of getting there. And the closer we get, the more refined we can get, right? So through the questioning, I guess I would say that, and this helps us with getting clear as well. Through the questioning also, so we look forward, we can see more clearly. We can also look more clearly at where we are now and realize that what we're doing is feeding the path for the ideal, right? And it helps, of course, it helps me become more confident in what it is that I'm doing. Because through the process, I realize that certain ways of saying things, people don't really understand it. It's too confusing. It's too philosophical or whatever. And people will tell me that, Steve, it's too philosophical. So then they bring it back down to where people are. And the messaging then begins to change. See, for the longest time, when I'd talk to people about things like this, and the odd time I would bring this sort of thing up, I'd be talking about what I want to do, right? Without creating that message to market match. What is it that people want? And what is my ideal? How can I somehow bring them together? How can I somehow make the ideal that I have also palatable, and not only palatable, but very desired by others? You know, and because usually ideals are quite broad, so you have to narrow it, and that's why niching is very, very, very important, right? So as time goes by, you know, I might have to niche it down to say, I help certain types of people become more confident through public speaking, because I help people is very, very broad, right? So that's why I think it's important to continue to question our conclusions, because a conclusion, after all, is something we've arrived at, right? It's a, you know, if we have arrived at something and that's it, then we don't continue questioning. It's like a defining. It's like what people do when they become religious, right? They say, oh, this is the book. This has all the answers. God, blah, 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 blah. Well, somebody who questions conclusions, they not only question the conclusions of the book, they not only can question the conclusions of the preachers coming up, but question their own conclusions that come up in their hearts. And that way, they can have some real growth. And so yeah, I would say question conclusions, and even question those conclusions and continue to get more and more and more and more clarity. I know this might sound a little bit all over the place, but that's part of the point. Part of the point is, if somebody was to ask me, Steve, what would you actually like to see within your ideal eventually down through time and so on, I would say that one of the things that I would really wish for is that I don't really teach anybody anything, but I hopefully encourage people to question their own conclusions and begin to self-educate, begin to think, essentially, right? And I think a lot of there could be a lot of good come from that. Steve here again, great chatting. Talk again soon. Please like, subscribe, and share if you like what I'm doing, and we'll talk to you later. Bye for now.